So, these two armies, the Shogi and Xiangqi army in Titan's Battalion, both have their own history of being problematic with the chess army. In fact, these three are, generally speaking, pretty incompatible without a whole lot of testing and brainstorming. Usually, you end up destroying some game feel somewhere if you're not careful. And even if you are careful, as we have been with like a decade of working on this and, hard lessons learned, it still can end up in a poor place. I shouldn't be recording on July 4th, should I? Oh well. So, let's get a few things out of the way. 1, I assume you know the rules of Xiangqi. 2, I assume you know the rules of Shogi. 3, I assume you have watched my Shogi versus chess and Xiangqi versus chess videos. And 3, thank you Gluttony Main for making this wonderful app. Gluttony Main Discord user. Discord user Gluttony Main. My brain's scrambled. But, now that we've got that out of the way, and over half of you have left, let's begin because, oh boy. First things first. There are a ton, and I mean a ton, of potential immediate drop issues down this file. Second, this square, and these squares, for that matter, are direct possible issues. So here's one example of some stuff that goes on. Well, these pawn pushes currently make early tokens, or token, the pawn promotion of the Shogi army. That token, the token of doom, when it happens, essentially turns this game into a mating puzzle. And Xiangqi's the one on the defense. The loading rule is effective enough on getting these out of the way, because that's enough time. These do end up unprotected in a lot of those lines, though. However, they are able to effectively stop that by putting pieces in the way at the moment. And in fact, even gain counterplay when they put the pieces in the way a lot of the time. Not always, but a lot of the time. There is a turn 1 check, but it doesn't do anything using the horse in hand, or the knight in hand, my bad. Let's look at this without these two pieces. So, right off the bat, this is an issue, and then it promotes. It's forking these two pieces. There's no other defense nearby. Even with this piece, you go to here, it does cover this, but you do still have this now here, and it can go potentially like one step and still be able to do something. Additionally, since this is a thing, because this covers it, and you go here, that's just a promoted lance now. And of course it can be immediately targeted and, potentially booted out because this cannon covers down this and this would cover there. But then it just potentially takes here or here. Luckily, thankfully, we do have that covered in current Xiang. But this matchup and these drops in hand is one of the reasons that we have to have Lion in its current form. And that's not the only time the Lion is necessary for covering these 6 squares, rather than just these 2 for like diagonals on the king. But it is one of the most devastating and notable. So without this, this soldier, since it ignores Nifu, we call it the tactician or the officer, can immediately trade for a horse if this isn't a thing. Okay. Despite all of that, there are still pushes like this. And, if you'll notice, this is a thing. It targets the rook has to move, the bishop gets here and promotes. Now, let's talk about some of the attempts that we were making and discussing from today, because often my community and I, particularly Couch Tomato, will sit down and really dig into the possibilities of Xiangqi and questioning all of the decisions we've already made. So I'm just going to run through today's discussion and treat it like a video. So let's get right here. Can you just make the palace immune to diagonal attack? Okay, that means these aren't an issue, but it doesn't prevent the weaknesses here, 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 and here. Notably, these weak squares aren't so bad thanks to the ability to get a horse here in time, or not that side. So this move and this move with this reinforcement layout. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Covers everything you need to of those, right? So that only leaves you with those dark square weaknesses I showed you before. Okay? And you can typically do that in time for most matchups. Shogun's is a little bit of an exception because they start essentially with a fianchettoed bishop. But what the fuck? There's something in the air in here, I swear. So, no, you can't just make the palace immune to diagonals. However, we were considering like an anti-Xiangqi palace rule where the diagonals only work through the halls in order to be gentler. So you can't have diagonals go through this. And what that would do is, one, aesthetically, it kind of works as a complement to Xiangqi. Two, it's a weak enough debuff with precedent to be comparable to the Xiangqi hall buff, where the pieces that move like a rook can go through the halls, that you don't have that issue per se. It is still debatable once we do get to balancing Xiangqi more, whether or not we should only allow the Xiangqi pieces to utilize the halls as if they're, trained to, and they're like, hall passages, giving them some kind of home field advantage. And if that is the case, and we end up deciding to do that, then, this conversation is null. But so far, the game feel says Xiangqi halls are fine. Xiangqi is Korean chess. If you don't know how to play Korean chess, I recommend you go look it up. However, keep in mind, Xiangqi is actually one of those games with like 5 different technically correct rule sets, based on whether or not you're playing in competition or not, whether or not draws are illegal in that competition or not, and whether or not you're in North and South Korea, and whether or not you're playing essentially an older patch, because the rules have been updated in the last like 50, 60 years. So all of those things being said, the Xiangqi halls are consistent across those rule sets, so you shouldn't have an issue if you just want to look up only what I mean. Okay. Boom. Couch Tomato does have a certain set of rules that they continue to talk about and bring up because they were considered. They do have the same sort of buff-debuff balance issues that anything that targets a certain type of piece does. So, for example, Shogi only has one piece that can move diagonally, and it's this one. It's the bishop. So, therefore, anything that targets diagonals doesn't affect the Shogi army nearly as much as it does the chess army. And furthermore, if we look at another army, Holy Empire, every single one of these pieces has a diagonal component to its movement. All of them. And none of them actually cause the issues. So if you're talking about diagonal move, then, it heavily affects Holy Empire compared to the other armies. And then you have armies like Twin Suns, which we will get to a little bit more later, which, thanks to their large number of leapers, the power of the twins, and the orbit mechanic and the flame sling mechanic is very aggressive, and is also pretty good at exploiting the weaknesses of the Xiangqi army in a lot of scenarios, because they're able to get pieces to squares more easily than other ones, while also being able to clear out and threaten things in ways that the other armies can't. So even something as simple as going here to threaten both of these at once, and then going here, flame slinging this down with a check, moving this over, and then lilac here, already you're having more problems than you normally would with most other armies, because Twin Suns is so fast and aggressive. Now, the way we have balanced Shogi is to deliberately put you in a game state that isn't the start of Shogi, which is having drops in hand, which is, debatable on, the math and geometry of it all, the fundamental calculus of chess variance on if this adds too much variance. But especially on top of Shogi already being a drop game, which plays completely different from a normal chess game. So having the Shogi drop rules and them having a low material count, pretty high king safety, some weird weaknesses in their formation that happen to be exploitable by the Xiangqi army, and drops for counter tempo, it creates this knife's edge imbalance where Xiangqi cannons attack the Shogi army really well. Pretty much as well as they attack the chess army in some ways, and worse in others. And then they're somehow better at exploiting the Xiangqi weaknesses than the chess army. So, okay, let's look at some of the other things we talked about today. So one of Tomato's pet rules is the river/moat, where anything crossing this barrier, or this barrier, depending, or this barrier, depending, has to stop once it does. And all of these iterations of that rule and combinations thereof have been considered, but the problem is, how say? The problem is it doesn't make sense in a Xiangqi context. First, that's a game feel issue, where pieces being able to get to these squares in the first place is just kind of normal. Same with these squares. Being able to go through the open column is just part of Xiangqi. Second game feel issue. It is not a part of any other game to be stuck here because of some arbitrary outside rule. It's like adding a piece that cannot be captured and has direct impact on an entire area of the board. It has weird impacts that mess with things. Third issue, I personally don't like how it feels at all. just from a chess variant perspective, it feels terrible to me anytime I've messed with it. And that gets in the way of me personally approving it, even if there are good arguments for the rule set. It's also the fact that that rule has to be added on top of other rules in order to be sufficient. And that layer of extra rules, like you need both diagonals banned through the palace and the moat rule in order to cover everything at the moment. And for drops to just be banned inside of this territory or inside the palace, some combination thereof. And whether or not orbits count as drops, Twin Suns orbits count as drops is debatable. Okay. So, here's a couple of ideas that have been thrown around. Let's see if I could find it. No, I don't have it here. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to show you guys something. So, something that has been thrown around because lions are an original piece is, why not just do this? Well, the initial issue is they're not as quick to defend everything. Oops. As you need. The elephant has to move for them to defend the squares. And then, that's one move, two move, and then it actually covers that. Or, which the lion can do that same defense in one move. And considering how loose the Xiangqi formation is, that time matters quite a bit. Especially when Shogi's sitting here dropping pieces turn 1. So the thought has been added to let them leap as long as they're on the ramparts, which is pretty valid. Also having them, self-suicide after they capture something in order for them to disappear more quickly. Another thought that has been thrown around is literally stacking the elephants on top of each other. So there's 2 in this square, and then the first one moves and the second one's there. And that has the added advantage of, if you aren't adding the jumping rule, they don't have to worry about trying to get through the king to mutually protect each other from the bishop attacks on the diagonal. Because if we go back to the old one, even if you do this and then this isn't protecting this one, so it's just a sitting duck for queen and bishop attacks. So, letting them leap and or this formation where they come from here. We also can just have the elephants to start back here, even still calling them lions, just be leaping elephants. Something like that. That type of idea where we bring it closer to the base game in the way the new piece moves. That's been discussed. However, at the moment, we still have these lions. Tomato brought up a really good point, though. One thing that I'm supposed to have in the back of my head is, what do those squares mean in the original game? These squares in particular. These are common anchor points for enemy pieces, including horses. Let me just grab a palace army real quick. To get to these weak point, quote unquote, squares on the 4th rank, and even these ones are common spots where rooks end up, where horses end up, even where infiltrated cannons end up, in order to project influence on the enemy board. The problem that we feel ends up happening is the other armies in this game are better at exploiting those intentional weaknesses in the Xiangqi formation than the Xiangqi army itself. So at the moment, we are gatekeeping that behind trading off some of the lions. And that means that you have to get rid of these pieces in order to be able to create that counterplay. I already showed an example of a Twin Suns attack. I already showed some examples of the Shogi attack. We have, in fact, for the Shogi army. Let me give you a little bit of context on how the current drops developed that I haven't so far. So the specific game feel that the Shogi army had and apologies for all the pauses, I've been checking my notes. The current game feel issue that the Shogi army had was that their material was such that they always felt they were on the back foot and defensive against the other armies. However, the way it felt had some precedence. So if I just add another Shogi army right now, just throw it here, what it felt like when you were facing the other armies, ignore these pieces in hand, is kind of like you're sitting there in a normal Shogi game, in an odds game, something like this. Maybe not all of those, but basically you didn't have the type of counterplay you wanted, and you would be down material and have to capitalize on your opponent's advantage in that material. Now, exactly how much material is roughly equivalent to how it felt to face the chess army, very debatable, but essentially you're in this type of situation where you're stuck on defense and you capitalize on the opponent's weaknesses to do anything. Against most of the other armies in the game, with potential exceptions against the Xiangqi army, which was also had a low power level issue. Just different low power level issues. And part of why this is so difficult is the baseline army that we are going with and choosing to include is the chess army, which is this absolute powerhouse compared to other popular variants. It's like almost at the peak of what the historical variants reach. There are some armies that are stronger, of course, like Chu Shogi, but as far as the really popular games go, the chess army is up there. And dear Lord, is the queen fucking broken. So, us trying to hit that point and address the weaknesses of these armies hasn't gone well for this specific matchup. At the moment, it is manageable, and only manageable because of the lions and the specific reinforcements. But if we're going to argue that anything that we have currently done with this current pair of armies isn't correct, which there's a pretty good argument that we shouldn't be using lions, and there's a pretty good argument that we shouldn't be specifically letting Shogi have pieces in hand, then we have an issue. Because we change any of this at all, and then the balance just rips again. As it has time and time again during our stuff. Both of these armies are in alpha, so they're very much in flux. Now, at this point in the discussion, Tomato had a couple of suggestions for potential replacements for the Shogi drop stuff, because he did think it was a bit much. I'm referring to them by their Discord name out of their request. I do know their name, and it is online somewhere, but they're couch tomato to me. So, first one, limiting the drops to the battlefield doesn't fully stop everything. Instead of starting drops, letting Shogi pawns double step. That causes new issues. This is even faster. Attack the head of that cannon. Some things that have been suggested today. Why don't we just give everything a rook or bishop capture? In fact, if it wasn't for the fact... I don't know if I should even upload this on the main channel. My brain is too scattered. Whatever. So, if we make the elephant just a bishop to 2 instead of the normal Xiangqi elephant, which we shouldn't do, because after research and discussion with some chess historians, the thing that would turn the players off the most would be modifying the movements of the base pieces in undue ways, which is why we tried so hard to get the Xiangqi king back down to being just a rook to 1. That set aside, we kind of can address everything I just discussed by making this a bishop to 2 instead of an elephant with the lame. So give it this square, and all of a sudden it's able to cover all of these weak squares. Similarly, for some of the pawn structure stuff, the Xiangqi elephant, here or here, in order to cover that square and that square, actually does a lot of that. And then, you know, the Xiangqi pawns, I'm just going to talk about it because Xiangqi basically covers all of the weaknesses that we were discussing. For the most part, it even has... the guards even cover those squares. Xiangqi just does all of the things that we're having trouble with. Anyways, this is why morning calm is much less problematic. This is just a mad rant. I don't even know if I should share this anywhere. Other than, you know, I guess I'll ping my Discord. But everyone who's really interested in this stuff is what took part in the discussion. I'm gonna put this on the VOD channel, fuck it. I could, like, write this out and put a well-edited version of it together and all of that, but... I just wanted those that don't want to just read through a Discord channel and scroll and find this discussion to be able to take part and understand what's going on. So, what came of this discussion? First of all, maybe, just maybe, the promotion should only be on the back 3 ranks for Shogi. So we don't have the token of doom. And the instant bishop promotion after this push. Maybe that's a good idea. So we're doing that. And it literally only affects this army and morning calm for shoguns. These are... We didn't find any, like, good fundamental changes for Xiangqi from this discussion. There were a lot of ideas thrown around that have potential and will need further discussion. But for the Shogi army, we reached 2 really good conclusions. So again, promotion, only back 3 ranks. Not enemy territory, camp, back 3 ranks. Specified back 3 ranks. Second thing, one of the things Shogi struggles with in the matchup, in any matchup, is the fact that this smaller battlefield is an option, and it allows for interactions to happen quicker before Shogi has time to really take care of things. So the knights and stuff get to these squares and affect them and affect any sort of pushes faster. So, like, for example, you do this, I can target it immediately with this, and you have to push it again. And then I can go here, and there's things going on where, you know, it can cause problems. Now, it's not a perfect fix. Like, generally speaking, rather than targeting it, you want to do this. But let's say you do this. What do you do here? Push again? Okay. You've done nothing. Let's target the weaknesses. So, the second thing that we've done is, even though we do have battlefields that are 3 across already, there's a 3x10, there's a 3x9, and there's a few others. There's 7 legal battlefields, and I believe yes, 5 of them. 5 of the 7 legal battlefields are 3 across. Despite that, Shogi is the only army in the game that is adversely affected balance-wise by the 2 across battlefields. So, now that we are specifying that promotion is inside enemy camp, we're adding another territory to the Shogi army as an option. 4 deep. And this allows the Shogi army to get the space that they need in order to properly defend, set up, and do everything. It makes it take longer for pieces to interact. And it's an option. And there's precedence for this, because if we look real quick back at the 2 palaces, this size of board across, and even on the 3 across boards, is already the same size as the Shogi army. So having that option is a good thing. That does mean, fundamentally, that we are adding more opening depth, which has pros and cons. And I will let you explore what those are pretty comfortably. And those were the 2 like real pulls from this discussion. We even asked the Shogi players, and they were down. Not a lot of them actually responded today, but Lily Lionmaid did, and they don't understand fully chess variant design and balance yet. They're getting a good handle on it. They're really smart, and they're much better player than me. They're gonna have to deal with this space for a while before they start seeing the same pitfalls that I have after a decade. It was Lily's suggestion to add the extra rank, and it's very valid. So is there anything else I need to talk about? Make lions capture only. The Twin Suns orbits and stuff. Yeah, Twin Suns orbits essentially give them access to squares that they shouldn't. Yeah, that's it. That's the whole thing. How long was this? 30 minutes. Hope everyone has a good night. Happy 4th of July. Hopefully the explosions weren't too distracting.